going to do things a little bit differently. I'm going to start out by reading our passage, which is Matthew chapter 6, verses 16 through 18. Whenever you fast, do not put on a gloomy face as the hypocrites do, for they neglect their appearance so that they will be noticed by men when they're fasting. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But you, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that your fasting will not be noticed by men, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Now, the tradition I grew up in, the church I grew up in, I had no idea what fasting was even all about. In fact, I really didn't learn anything about it until the first time as a teenager they told me that I could not eat after midnight because of a test being taken the next day. My introduction to the concept of fasting was doing it for a medical test. And so when people would talk to me about it, when other folks that I knew at other churches or people that I knew through the ministry I was involved in college would talk about fasting, and they'd talk about, and then I chose to fast for 3 days, and it was, at that point it was a popular thing in the campus ministry that people would fast to get God's answer about who they were supposed to marry. So I'd have a friend tell me they were doing this, and for all the world, it sounded like they were twisting God's arm. Like they were going, okay God, I'm going to do this for you, now you got to do this for me. I mean, that's how it sounded. It sounded like they were fasting so that God would fix their financial situation, or they were fasting so that God would bring them a girlfriend, or that they were somehow using it as a way to, it was like prayer plus. It was like prayer with added pressure. Not only did I pray extra, and I got all, I still will never forget one person I was trying to witness to, and they were talking about how they were speaking against some sort of infection on their hand, and that they were speaking with authority in their voice, and that was going to make their prayer work. It's weird. But it was that kind of a feeling. And so then as I studied my Bible, and I encountered, and I found that over and over again in the Old Testament, there are some specific things about fasting, and then here in the New Testament, Jesus even assumes that we as his disciples will fast at times. Now, I'm smart enough to put 2 and 2 together. I do know that you can't force God to do anything. He's God, we're not. He has the power, we don't. We can't make him do anything. And so, I knew that this idea that fasting was somehow a way to obligate God to do the thing he wanted couldn't really be true. And as I read the scripture and I saw people fast, that never seemed to be what they were doing. And it seemed to be much more focused on this idea of setting aside time, setting aside space in your life to walk away from what's normal. Because we all know what normal is. Normal is breakfast, and a snack, and lunch, and then later on getting something with your friends, and if you have some coffee, you got a pastry with the coffee, and then dinner, and then of course there's late night snack before you go to bed. We know that that's what normal is. And stepping away from normal, this idea seemed to be that it was a stepping back from what's normal, from what's usual in our life, as a way of dedicating ourselves to God, as a way of sharpening our ability to hear what he says, as a way of, it seemed almost to be removing distractions. And then I began thinking about all the ways in which we see it in our own life. I mean, most of us are familiar with the idea of a medical fast, with the idea of going in for a test and having to not eat food for a certain period of time before that so that the test results will be accurate instead of completely bonkers. And most of us are familiar with that, and there's apparently this whole new thing coming out about fasting for losing weight. Now, doesn't that sound like a great idea? I'm not going to eat at all. Yes, you'll lose weight, but I'm not sure this is going to be a good thing or a good way to do it. And there's this whole thing, I could not believe I found this article. It was a guy who was talking about running. And he said that this might work. So you fast on the days you don't run, and then you eat on the days you do run. I'm just not sure that that's what God was talking about when he was talking about fasting. That we would use it for weight control or looking our best or anything along those lines. It seems to be much more a way of cultivating our intimacy with God. One of the interesting things I did see from that is even those who take up this idea of fasting for a secular reason, for meditation or for weight loss, what they find is they've suddenly got all this time on their hands. Because apparently if you do take the time, suddenly you're not making breakfast or sitting down and eating breakfast or going out for that snack and so on and so forth. And what they found is that there were hours in their day they didn't know about. And when it comes to fasting, in terms of fasting for God, one of the recommendations, one of the parts of that is taking that time that we would be consuming, and turning it instead into a time of prayer, a time of focus, and a time of getting near to God. So as we approach this, I think the first thing we need to kind of walk towards here is that my experience growing up, this was really weird. And was something I hadn't heard of. And I think for most of us, we're not familiar with the concept of fasting. And we've heard and we've seen people make all these wild promises about how it can obligate God. About how if we do it, God will give us what we want. And so first of all, I want to just kind of clear that up a little bit. So that we understand that the concept of fasting when it comes to God is this idea of setting aside a time to work to be closer to Him. And that somehow abstaining from food in that time can help us draw nearer. Now understand, let me be really clear, if you are a diabetic, God is not calling you to fast for a day, okay? He's not. Like if I were a diabetic, like I would not fast from food, I would fast from, I can't believe I'm going to say this, coffee. So there are other ways that you can achieve the same thing, something else in your life that is pleasant and that is good. So God's not telling us to endanger our health or destroy us or stamp some kind of one-size-fits-all thing on it. But it's that idea of denying yourself something that is pleasant, that is good, that is appropriate, not because you need to get it out of your life, not because you gotta get control of your hunger or something like that, but simply is that you're saying, God, I'm going to give this away to you for now so that I can hear you better. So that it doesn't form a distraction. So that it doesn't pull me away in a critical moment. And that's what fasting is about when we see it in the Scriptures. Now, the specific thing that Jesus is addressing here in Matthew chapter 6, as we've set this groundwork about what fasting is he's dealing with the issue of how and why we fast. What's going on at the time is that the Pharisees, those who are the religious elite of the time, those who were in Jerusalem and are well respected for their religiosity, they fast twice a week. There are 2 prescribed days of the week. It's like Wednesday and Monday that they are supposed to fast. And so what they would do to show that they were God-fearing Pharisees and religious people is that on Monday morning, instead of getting up and taking their morning shower and getting dressed in their clothes and getting ready to go to work normally, they wouldn't wash at all. They'd leave their hair uncombed and sticking out. And they would put back on their old clothes from the day before and be walking around looking very unhappy and glum. They'd be looking at their neighbor's lunch going, that's what they'd be doing all day long. So everybody would know that they were fasting, that they were obeying God's rules, they were doing the right thing and being spiritual people. And they do this twice a week. And what Jesus says, he says, that's not how it works. He says, when you fast, do not put on a gloomy face, as the hypocrites do. Not the first time he's called the Pharisees hypocrites. For they neglect their appearance, so they will be noticed by men when they are fasting. Truly I say to you, they've received their reward in full. And remember, this has been an ongoing theme through these three chapters. And it's really where I came up with the title for the whole series. The title of The Scandal of Being Religious. Because so often the scandal of our being religious is that religion is supposed to be, our religion of Christianity is supposed to be about getting closer to God, about drawing nearer to God. But so often the religious activities we do are not about God. They're about us. So often the religious activities we do are about getting noticed, getting seen, getting spotted, getting elevated, and people talking about how great we are. And yet that's not what Christ wants us to do. He talks about these activities that we do to get closer to God and says when you do them in front of people, when you do them to be seen, when you do them so that everyone will notice, when you decide that you need to brag about how much you've given, or brag about how long you pray, or pray for show when there's an opportunity to pray publicly, or in this case, fast and do your religious obligations to God in such a way that the whole world has to notice and everybody gets to see that what you're doing is showing off. And that the reward for showing off is people notice you showing off. And that's all. That it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. It doesn't draw us closer to God. It doesn't increase our intimacy with God. It doesn't make us more able to hear His voice and listen to what He has to say if we do the things to follow Him for the sake of being seen. That it's not just about our activities, but about our motivation. It isn't just about our external actions, but our internal desires and focus and the reason for what we do. He says, but you, when you fast, anoint your head with oil and wash your face, so that your fasting will not be noticed by men, but by your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Now, he is talking about the common practice at that time. You didn't get up and take a shower every morning. You went ahead and you put olive oil on your hair and you combed it out. Now, one of you might choose to do that, and I know different people use product of different kind in their hair, but I don't think anybody gets up in the morning, goes and gets their extra virgin olive oil and pours it on and then combs it in. I mean, I could, but it'd be kind of silly. It'd get everywhere. But the idea here is he's saying, whatever the normal routine and regimen of your morning is, don't interrupt it. Don't change it. Don't step away from it. Because that's what people expect. I think the broader application here is our activity for God. In this season of time, with the stuff going on with the nominating committee that we prayed for, it's kind of an extra focus on the service that we give to God. And fasting is one way that we serve Him, but there are so many other ways that we choose to serve Him. And they're difficult, and they cause strain, and it isn't always easy, and it isn't always simple, and sometimes there are frustrations involved, and frankly, we're all people. And as people, we don't necessarily hold up our end the way that we should, and therefore there are things that need to be forgiven. And it can be tempting. So very tempting within our Christian walk, within our walk with God, to treat the things we do for Him, whether serving others or simply the things like giving and praying and coming to church and coming on Wednesday night and those sorts of things, as if they're these huge chores that we have to do. As if they're these monumental things, so that when somebody asks us to go someplace over a weekend, we say, no, I have to go to church. Then when somebody talks to us about, maybe you can come with us and we can go to breakfast, you go, no, I have to go do the nursery in the morning. That we talk about sometimes doing things for God. And we get that gloomy face that he's talking about. And please understand, I'm not saying that every moment's supposed to be happy, happy, joy, joy, and hunky-dory, and, none of the children will ever throw up on the carpets, and, none of the youth will, none of the people will ever misbehave, and there won't be difficulties and distractions and problems, because there will. And because if it was all easy, it wouldn't be service. If it was all laughs and giggles, then it wouldn't be work. But that there's a reality here that the attitude that Christ asks of us in our fasting, in our giving, in our praying, is also present in our serving. That we look to what we're doing and, it's cleaning spit off of an 18-month-old's chin. But by doing that, you're teaching that kid that the church is someplace where they're loved. You're teaching that kid's parents that the church is someplace where they can be trusted with their children and where their children will be cared for. And believe me, I can tell you story after story of people in this church that are here in this church because we love their children first. That serving in the Vacation Bible School, yes, I can tell you, the kindergartners are going to get wild. And they're going to scream. And they're going to run down the hall with their hands in the air. They're going to do that. And it's going to get on your last nerve by Friday. But that's teaching that kid that this is a place where knowing about God is fun. And learning about God is enjoyable. And that there are things that they, at their young age, can actually understand. And that their best exposure and understanding of what God is like and who they are those very adults giving them snacks and teaching them and showing them missions and all of those things. And I guess what I'm saying is that for all of us, it's okay to admit to it's hard. You know, it's okay to say, this is not really what I'm looking forward to doing right now. But to approach serving God, not just here in the church, but for your mom, or for your child, or for your sibling, or for your neighbor. Not in the way the world does. Grumping around and stomping your feet and feeling obligated and frustrated and I've got to do this for them to be a good neighbor or a good child or a good parent or whatever. But instead to have the attitude that says, I'm serving God when I do this for them. And God loves them. And it isn't going to kill me to do it with a smile on my face. It isn't going to kill me to set aside wanting everybody to look at my service and to serve them because God loves them. And because it's something they need. And so my encouragement to you today is that as you face the obligations of your life, whether the spiritual obligations before God or the